Hey, it's Element39 again and welcome back to a new video. Today we're going to be talking about why ancient China is such a fascinating civilization. Anyways, I hope you liked the video. Let's dive straight in! Ancient China is such a fascinating place. So many customs, behaviors, and values that are held today stem from the wisdom of the ancient Chinese. We can easily argue that it is the most important to human development and to how civilizations progress to what they are today. Yet, despite this influence, ancient China is rarely studied in schools due to the complexities that come with 5,000 years of history and of the outsized influence that the ancient Greeks and ancient Romans had on the Western world. So, if this is the case, why is ancient China so important to the civilizations of now? We begin as what is now known as Suizhou in the middle of Hubei. Though such a place seems to be in the middle of nowhere, it actually contains the most valuable archaeological sites of one of the most valuable artifacts in China, so precious that it cannot be taken out. This archaeological site contains the tomb of an eminent aristocrat during the Zhou dynasty, which houses an extremely important artifact, the Bianzhou. Owned by the Marquis Yi, it is a symbol of the complicated rites and rituals that still persist today. But how does it make China so critical to human development? To do that, we need to explain the history of the Zhou dynasty. The Zhou dynasty was founded in 1046 BCE and fell in 771 BCE, and is usually split into two major sections, the Eastern Zhou and the Western Zhou, also very commonly known as the Warring States or 战国时期, and the Spring and Autumn or 春秋时期. It was during these periods that the majority of the legal framework, philosophies, and ritual practices were developed and refined. Some of the most important ideas developed in this time period were Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism. These three schools of thought would be very important and crucial in influencing many of the future dynasties in their behavior and values. Confucianism, or the Rujia, primarily deals with the concept of unity and how that would be achieved in society. There are three overarching values in Confucianism. One must be benevolent to others. 2, we must have a general sense of right and wrong. And 3, respecting authority. Avoiding conflict, showing respect to elders, and to have a good or elevated morals was a must. One of the prevailing attitudes of Confucianism is that for unity to be achieved, one must pay respect to the patriarchy, which represents the power structure in ancient China. This was adapted through the centuries as values changed to just be respecting the authority. For example, a child would have to respect their parents' authority and society, the laws. The emperor and other people in power would need to be respectful of the people's rights and treat them with the same respect that the people give to them. The goal is to be a fair and just ruler of the society. This also means that if a disaster happens, it's just blamed on the emperor. Disaster is just a sign that the people in government are not prepared or ready to rule, or they're just ineffective rulers. This is most notably shown in a commentary of the I Ching, where it says, when high and low are in disharmony, yin and yang become confused and bizarre occurrences are born. This seems to have no relation to why disaster happens to ineffective leaders until it is considered that the universe depended on the interplay between opposing forces, yin representing woman, darkness, coldness, and earth, and yang representing man, light, fire, heat, or warmth. Since the government was stubbornly patriarchal, infiltration by women was seen as weakening the government. A weak emperor was also seen as a sign of weakness. On the other hand, Taoism, or Daojia, is another prevailing school of thought that was also developed in the Zhou dynasty. Taoism was first conceived by Lao Tzu, who was a court official. He was disillusioned with the court of ancient China and spent his time as a hermit. Before he left, a border guard asked him to put all of his thoughts on how to make man better. So, Lao Tzu wrote a book of all his thoughts and teachings, which became known as the Tao Te Ching. This, along with the writings of another writer, has become the keystone of Taoism and Taoists. Taoism is split into two parts, the philosophies and the religion itself. In ancient China, it was common to call someone a Taoist to mean that they were philosophers or concerned themselves with the Tao instead of thinking what it means. Taoism is mainly concerned with following the way, and like Confucianism, follows three main virtues: honesty, compassion, and frugality, called the three treasures. It is mainly concerned with living in harmony with all other living things and in balance with the Tao, or the path. While it is hard to properly define the Tao, as it has many interpretations, the Tao is sort of like the way of the universe. These philosophies of living in harmony have been a part of the social customs of ancient China for a very long time. One of the most important systems implemented was the Fengjin system, a system that is similar to the feudal system practiced in medieval Europe. It was developed because the Zhou dynasty needed to decentralize the government to rule ancient China properly. Even though ancient China was still much smaller than its modern counterpart, the technologies were not advanced enough to rule the entire country from one place, and thus, the government needed to decentralize. This means that the king, or sovereign, would endow some land, soldiers and peasants to the lords for them to govern. In return, the lords would send troops and some money from the taxes to the king. It's like the serf and feudal system in Europe, where the serfs or peasants were bound to the land and they had to pay a certain amount to the lord that owned the land that they were farming on. The lord then gives them a portion of those taxes to the king, as well as taking on the knights that form much of the military of medieval Europe. This was originally a very effective and successful way of governing the land, but as the power of the Zhou sovereign fell, the power of the marquises and lesser lords rose and led to each of their estates turning into smaller, independent states. The Zhou monarchy was still kept, but they were really just ceremonial monarchs. In reality, all the power was in the hands of the marquises. There were over 150 smaller states, but most of them were annexed by the states of Qin, Jin, Qi, and Chu, the four most powerful. Eventually, after many years of fighting, the Qin dynasty finally united all the states, ending the Zhou dynasty and starting the Qin dynasty under the rule of the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang. It was during this time that the rites and rituals that made up the ancient Chinese court flourished. The mandate of heaven, a justification and legitimization of the rule of the emperors of ancient China were developed. Confucius and Lao Tzu wrestled with the philosophical questions in this period, ultimately founding Confucianism and Taoism, which would guide the Chinese court until the Qing dynasty. Later, legalism became another dominant school of thought, espousing the values of, surprise, surprise, following the law. All of these fundamental elements of the Chinese court was established in the spring and autumn period, a period of relative peace and stability. development in the arts were also prominently featured. It was during these periods where bronze making and bronze working and craftsmanship was at its peak in China. Bronze artifacts were especially prized since they belonged solely to the nobility, that is, kings, marquises, dukes and earls, and lords. At the time, there was no steel or iron. Bronze was the most advanced metal alloy they could manufacture. As a result, bronze was associated with royalty and the nobles closest to the king. An example of this would be the 9 ding that only the sovereign or king would possess, like how only emperors and consuls of ancient Rome could wear the red sandals and a purple toga. In fact, to ask about how many ding a person had, or 1 ding, was equal to asking how much power someone had and what standing they were of in the ancient Chinese court. It's like asking how many slaves one had in ancient Rome or how many property one has. In the Zhou dynasty, the nobles could even be classified by their rank according to how many ding they were allowed to possess. The emperor alone could possess 9 to use in ceremonies, lords 7, all the way down to the lowest ranking government officials that could only use 1. But what are they really? The ding is usually a bronze cauldron. It's either circular, 3-legged, 2-eared, or rectangular, 4-legged and 2-eared. They have a long history stretching back to Neolithic times. Early ding were made with clay and had no handles, and were primarily used to cook and serve food in a safer way, although sometimes they were used in rituals and as a status symbol. The early ding were usually undecorated, seeing as it only served the purpose of heating and preparing food. The advent of the bronze casting gave rise to the better-known bronze ding. These ding would often be ornamented and decorated with various patterns such as eyes, phoenixes, dragons, or even tigers. In earlier times, the decorations were mostly simple patterns such as spirals, lightning, and whirls drawn around to add texture, but in later times, 3D animals were made, usually just for decoration. The ding of ancient China was known to host sacrifices to ancestors, animal or human. This is due to a custom from the Shang dynasty that dictated that unhappy ancestors would cause the current, living family members to experience bad luck and fortune. To keep them happy, sacrifices of food and wine were made. At first, wine was deemed more important, but after the large political and cultural shift that happened between the Shang and the Zhou, the King Wu of Zhou decided that overconsumption and overvaluing of wine was the reason why the previous dynasty, the Shang dynasty, fell. After that, food, and by association, the ding, became the most important ritual bronzes, especially in the Zhou dynasty. Due to their large size, it's speculated that animals were cooked whole in the ding and left there for the gods. Words were even inscribed in them, mainly to commemorate special occasions. One such example is of the words carved into the Mao Gong Ding, where over 500 characters describe the Duke of Mao's gratitude to the king at the time. Even though the bronze ding existed in the rites and rituals of the Shang dynasty, they didn't have as much significance as they had in the Zhou. Possessing 9 bronze ding was seen as an expression of divine and absolute power over the peoples. The great King Yu of the Xia dynasty was said to have cast 9 great ding and distributed it to 9 lesser lords during his reign. Unfortunately, these mythical ding have been lost, either having been melted down during the Qing Chao or lost during the conflicts of the warring states. Other, lesser ranks would not be allowed to possess more ding than what was allowed by their social status. It was a crime to do so by directly opposing the power of the king. These rigid social structures, set up in the Zhou Chao, stayed intact throughout ancient Chinese history until the fall of the Qing dynasty, the last imperial dynasty, in 1911. Similarly, ownership of any major bronze artifact such as the bianzhong was forbidden. Playing the bianzhong was also different from playing a standard classical musical instrument in the Western European sense. Commoners weren't even allowed to touch or play it, since possessing a bianzhong is the expression of divine and absolute power that the emperor had. A commoner or a person of lesser social status touching or playing the bianzhong is like a plebeian in ancient Rome wearing the solid purple toga. They're challenging the power of their ruler, and it's considered a crime on the level of plotting to kill the king. The bianzhong and other bronze artifacts like the ding were valued to that level. If the bianzhong and the ding fell into the hands of people with lesser power, it'd be called a time of Li Bong Yue Huai, a Chinese idiom meaning that society is complete and utter disarray due to the proper rites, ceremonies, and music not being followed. This is the social period that the bianzhong of the Marquis of Yi were uncovered in. The biggest and most complete bianzhong that have been uncovered are the bianzhong of the Marquis of Yi. It consists of 64 bells ranging in pitch from C2 to D7, all individually pitched. The bronze bells were made in a particular fashion with 36 studs grouped into 4 groups of 9, and the cross sections of the bells being leaf-shaped. The bells were grouped into 3 groups by pitch and hung on 2 racks out perpendicular to each other. The bells are played by being struck with wooden mallets, usually 1 or 2 at a time, to create a polyphonic texture. Each bell was produced in such a way as to produce 2 tones, depending on where the bell was struck, a testament to the scientific and technological might of ancient China. If the bells were played correctly, then both tones would be separate and could be played at the same time. Even the harmonics are separate from each other. These bells were played during important rituals, ceremonies, and celebrations, as well as just being played for entertainment. These bianzhong show a good example of how Chinese music developed from the scales that are apparent from their pitches, analysis of the hertz of the bells, and recording what tone according to spectral analysis. These bells show a deep understanding of scale construction and music theory 2,000 years before Guido of Arezzo developed a similar system in Europe. The bells of the bianzhong were also arranged in a way such that the bells were divided into 3 groups: the largest bass bells, the smallest bells at the top, and the middle tones, which covered the largest range, as well as covering all the tones and semitones of the Western classical scale. Inscriptions on the bells show that, at that point, ancient Chinese had already developed a way of notating music, naming each note in the scale as a specific character or combination of characters depending on the intervals between the notes. The scale was composed of 6 tones and 6 accidentals, not unlike the Western scale with 7 tones and 5 accidentals, or to the chromatic scale, which is the most commonly used in HUD. But there is another very important contribution that the ancient Chinese made to music in the form of 12-tone equal temperament. Sound is produced when an object vibrates. This is how musical instruments make their music, either by having something vibrate a string or resonating with some set frequencies. These intervals between the notes on a scale are determined by how many times the string vibrates in a defined amount of time. The frequency of a note or tone is measured in hertz, which is defined as, obviously, the number of vibrations per second. The human ear interprets these vibrations as sound, which is how we hear. However, frequency analysis can only ever tell so much about the notes. What about all the weird frequencies in the middle that aren't really one note but not another either? That's where intervals come into play. Not only are they the basis for harmony, which supports melody, but also allows us to construct a scale and relevant modes. This is very important for the development of music theory, since it allows us to construct harmonies and write them down. But is there a way to mathematically solve this problem? The first person to try to solve the problem of mathematical tuning was Pythagoras. He was the first to describe the relationship that intervals had with each other in the form of ratios between the vibrations, or, as we call it now, frequencies. An octave resulted in the string vibrating at twice the frequency of the bass note. So, an octave has a ratio of 2 to 1. Similarly, a ratio of 2 to 3 is called a fifth, 3 to 4 is a fourth, 4 to 5 for the major third, 5 to 6 for the minor third, and so on till the second, which is produced when 2 frequencies are in the ratio of 8 to 9. There are also numerous other intervals that are not defined like this, such as the tritone, an interval comprised of the bass note and the note 3 tones above the bass, also known as the augmented fourth or diminished fifth. This is known as Pythagorean tuning, where the tuning is based on tuning a stack of fifths. In practice, however, Pythagorean tuning leads to slight discrepancies with the tune, since none of the intervals can be perfectly in tune, being either slightly flat or slightly sharp. But that raises the question, what is a tone? What is a semitone? And here lies the genius of the ancient Chinese people. The semitones that we know are like the atoms of the scale. They are the smallest unit and everything builds up from that. A semitone above the note C is the note C sharp. Up from there is D, then D sharp, and so on and so forth. A tone, known as two semitones, is also crucial in scale construction. From these two, we get the scale. In the case of the major scale, we can construct it by starting from the bass note, then working by adding tones and semitones in the pattern of tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. Similarly, a minor scale can be constructed in the pattern of tone, semitone, tone, tone, semitone, tone and a half, semitone. However, this has a problem. The scale by itself will be nicely in tune. What about the intervals between the notes? Is there a way to make all the intervals nice and in tune and equivalent with each other? Spoiler alert, no. But we can use many mathematical models to approximate this. We can make the scale roughly in tune by using the 12th root of 2 to tune the notes. Each frequency is the 12th root of 2 times the frequency of the last note. This was first calculated by the Ming Chinese prince Zhu Zaiyu, who used an 81-place abacus to calculate the 12th root of 2. These complex calculations were eventually recorded in his Book of Mathematics. Another person tried to solve the problem. He was a mathematician, a Dutch mathematician by the name of Simon Stevin. His work was found and dated to be as early as 1605. However, his manuscript's not found until 1885. However, he was frequently wrong in his calculations. This means that many people today still regard 注在语 as the true originator of 12-tone equal temperament. Music theory aside, the important thing that links the Ding and the Bianzhong together is that it is made out of bronze, a significant metal alloy today. Bronze is composed of a ratio of copper to tin. If there is too much copper or too much tin in the bronze, the bells are liable to shatter. A significant example of this would be the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, which cracked when it first was struck and had to be recast several more times before it could be struck again. It would have taken many years to perfect and make the perfect ratio of copper to bronze, let alone develop the craftsmanship to make these bells. However, that's not the end to the technological superiority that the ancient Chinese had until the Industrial Revolution. To make bronze is a very finicky process since it requires relatively pure copper and tin. A major reason why the Liberty Bell had to be recast was because in the second recasting, pewter was used instead of pure tin to cut costs. The lead in the pewter scrambled the internal structure of the metal, causing it to have a dull sound. To purify tin and copper seems easy today, but in ancient times it was really difficult as high temperatures needed to be reached to melt the metal and scrape off the slag on the surface of it. Unlike ancient Greece, on the other hand, it's almost impossible to assume that the craft of practice of using bronze was transmitted from one civilization to another. It is almost certain that ancient China developed the art of making, casting, and wielding bronze independently. Means that the ancient Chinese have been settled and been developing in that area for a great many years. Isn't that impressive? Another very important thing about these artifacts, particularly the Bianzhong, is a testament to how China was one of the main powers in Asia at the time and how that influence spread throughout. The Bianzhong is known as the Hensho in Japan, the Pyeongzhong in Hangul, and the Bingcheng in Vietnamese. Why? Because these countries have been in contact with ancient China, all of the technologies are transmitted from China into these other countries. Another good example is the spread of Buddhism from India to the rest of the East. The epic tale of the monk Xuanzang journeying from the east to the west, now immortalized as Tripitaka from the Journey to the West, or 西游记, depicts how Buddhism spread. After reaching ancient China, the teaching of the Buddha spread to ancient Japan through trade. The same can be said for many other technologies that were communicated and shared in this manner. This shows the influence that ancient China had on surrounding countries, especially its neighbors Korea and Japan. Arguably, the most important thing about ancient China being so important to human development is the fact that it is so long-lasting. The Zhou dynasty and the artifacts here that represented was a time where the culture was being established. These social and governmental structures and philosophies and behaviors have been set up in the Zhou dynasty, and they've all been maintained and upheld for countless generations, even till now. The same can be said about the rites and rituals, music, and behavior patterns. The Zhou dynasty is particularly significant since it was during that time when there was the most development and also when those behaviors that define Chinese culture today were entrenched. All three of these civilizations show why ancient China is the ancient civilization with the most impact on humankind. So why don't we study it? Hi, it's Element 39 again, and congratulations, you made it to the end! Woo! Anyways, I hope you liked this video, and please don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're watching me on Bilibili right now, please remember, 一键3连 Right, anyways, adios!